All right, cool. Well, first of all, happy Wednesday. Thanks for being here, you guys. We got Carly. I'm definitely keeping track and taking data of who can come on the calls at what times, So moving forward, try to show up if it's a time that works for you, because that tells me to keep this time slot as we progress. Also, friendly reminder, we still have our referral program, which is insane. It's been amazing and it's so fun. It's everyone who has a friend that joins, it seems like you're a little bit more successful because now you have a little accountability buddy. You have more people in the community that are, more like each other and whatnot. So keep doing that. Keep making money. We've given out now a total of $600. So let's keep those good vibes going. All right, let's share this screen. This is a good one. I am excited. I say that every week, but seriously, this is big step. All right. So, proper form and basic exercise anatomy. When I tell you it was so hard to stop myself, because there's obviously so much more that we could get into here. So I do want to say that, first of all, if you have any questions after this, following this, obviously you can ask on the call. And we'll be diving more in depth just throughout your coaching experience. But I love this shit. And if I was familiar with anatomy when I was first starting my fitness journey, oh my God, it would have helped so much. I swear that's the biggest difference that made a huge shift for me between my 5th year and my 6th year of actually lifting and wanting to see progress, was understanding what is actually going on, understanding true mind muscle connection and how to envision what's working and true alignment and whatnot. So this is definitely the tip of the iceberg, but hopefully it kind of, opens up some doors. Also, I want to give you an idea. I never took anatomy in high school. I never took anatomy in college. I only ever took it when I became a coach, as well as when I became a yoga teacher. So maybe you took this in college or high school or whatever. Maybe it's a little bit of a refresher, but hopefully it's interesting and applicable. So I posted this on my story, so maybe you guys have already seen it. I did add a few other things, but I'm just going to read through these real quick. And then after I go through these, let's say there's I don't know, maybe 20-ish, maybe 15 bullet points here. I want you guys to say in the chat, or you can, say it out loud, about how many you think you are familiar or aren't familiar, maybe by a percentage, I'm familiar 50% of these things, 100% of these things, 0% of these things, just so I can kind of gauge maybe where your confidence level is, or just understanding on just an idea of these topics. So lengthening and shortening of muscles, eccentric, concentric, isometric movements, tempo, upper body strength or dumbbell leg movements, spine and rib cage alignment, core stability, deadlifts, kettlebell swings, rows, that would be referring to form, hip hinge, knee hinge, foot position for targeting either glutes or targeting quads, 4 points of the torso, jaw, neck, traps, and how this whole area kind of goes together. Lateral raise form, tricep, bicep movements, lats. What are they? What are the lats? What is this? We're doing a lat pull down. What are doing a lat pull over? What are these lats? I don't know. I feel like that one's a funny one because it took me 8 years to understand what my lats were, literally. And then stacking joints. So maybe just in the chat or whatever, what percentage of these do you feel you are familiar with these? Okay, Vicky does not know the 4 points of the torso. That's totally fine. She knows 85%. Cool, love that. Lauren's 30%. Awesome, good. That's good to hear, so that this isn't just I don't know, 50% for Ansley, 30% Stephanie, 60, 70 for Bryn, 40 for Alana, 75, 80. Cool. Good stuff. Okay, so this should be fun. Yay! Let's get into it. 25% Angie. Yes. All right. Let's take notes too. If you have a pen, paper, phone, something like that, or a picture, that's definitely a thing. Let's everyone take a picture, post it on your story, tag me, tag Frequency, tag Sheena, just like we did last week for the menstrual call, which Morgan got a free supplement from that. Yay, Morgan. If you guys take a picture at any point during this call, ideally of a slide that you find interesting, post it, tag it. That helps or tag us. That helps a lot. All right. Woohoo. You already know I got to start with a disclaimer. First of all, everybody's anatomy is slightly different, okay? Your genetics play up how long your bones are, how long your muscle fibers are, the shape, everything. So with that, everyone's going to be slightly different. That's why it is very important to make sure you have somebody like a coach watching you, giving you form advice in the beginning, because it is a little bit different person to person, depending on maybe what any injuries, things you have as well, like imbalances and whatnot. So we're going to start off with the muscular system first. So muscles and how they move. So muscles are made up of muscle fibers. I like to envision them as like guitar strings. So they're fibers that go like this, right? Knowing which way those strings run is very beneficial to understand, meaning where the muscle starts and where it ends, because that's where the muscle fibers go to, right? As origin and insertion. So we're not going to go through every single one, obviously, but just to give you an example, like the bicep goes from your shoulder to your elbow, starts here, ends here. The muscle fibers go along that line. Some things like the chest, the pec muscle, are more circular, but they still have lines and they kind of go like this. So understanding the lines, the muscle fibers, is beneficial to understanding how the muscle is contraction, which direction it's contracting and lengthening. So they work by lengthening, which is stretching, and shortening, which is contracting. Bicep curl is just such an easy example, right? This is lengthening the bicep. This is contracting and shortening the bicep. The muscle is literally moving like this, like an accordion. So there's 3 parts to an exercise, like to a rep, to a movement. I would assume this applies for all movements. That's probably a generalized statement. I would say majority, at least the strength training ones that we are doing. So there's the eccentric, the concentric, and the isometric. Lengthening of the muscle. So this part of the bicep curl is the eccentric, so the going down, but it doesn't always refer to down, okay? The shortening of the muscle, that's the concentric. I like to think of that as like contraction, right? Concentric. And then the isometric. So that's any part of the movement where you're not moving, but still generating force. So let's say we're doing a bicep curl. We start with our arm down with the bicep lengthened. Then we contract, we start shortening. And if we were to hold it here, then that would be isometric. But now that I'm saying that, actually, this wouldn't really be the most ideal isometric, because you're not contracting much force. The weight is kind of just sitting there at this point. More of an isometric would be holding the dumbbell here, right? Holding it at that midpoint. So we're still generating force, but we're not necessarily moving. Another thing could be like a plank. Like a plank, all your core, all your muscles are working, but they're not necessarily going through the eccentric or concentric movement aspect. So those are the 3 ways they move. And something that is going to be very important to learn so that you don't have back pain in the future, and so that you have proper alignment for basically every exercise moving forward, is this one thing. I want you guys to put your hands, your palms on your stomach. And which way do you think you have to move in order to lengthen your abs? And then which way do you have to move to shorten your abs, to contract your abs? Right? You see what's going on here? Yes, Gina's doing. I see her. So it's kind of like we're almost like doing a standing crunch. So when they lengthen is almost when we kind of have to lean back. We get an arch in our back. And then when our abs contract, it's kind of when we start to round forward, right? So when I say engage your core, brace your core, engage your abs, whatever it is, that's what it is. We want to kind of be shortening the abs. We don't want them splayed out, flared out. We don't need to be rounded in a hunchback position, but just to keep them tight, okay? So that's how I can really tell when people are doing squats or deadlifts or rows or anything. If it looks like their ribs, their abs are just splayed out, completely lengthened, that's how I can tell that your core is embraced. And that's really going to cause a lot of back pain now in that exact movement or in the future. And then also tempo. So tempo, some of you guys are probably familiar with, because I put that in a lot of your exercises. So paying attention to the speed of those 3 parts of the movement, right? So the speed of the eccentric, concentric, or isometric. So we could do like 3 seconds on the way up, 3 seconds on the way down. We could do 3 seconds on the way up, a 1 second hold, 5 seconds on the way down. Okay, so that tempo is a huge, huge, huge factor in the intensity of the exercise, especially if you don't have access to heavier weights. You know, if you are somebody who's working out at home or only has dumbbells, or maybe the machine doesn't go heavy enough for you, you must be the Hulk. Utilizing tempo is a really good way to progress, to add more time under tension without just adding weight, adding reps. So it's basically kind of like a safer way to progress. And tempo is just a really good tool to be aware of. Here's a fun little picture. So this is the muscular system. And I like this picture because you can see those muscle fibers. Can you guys see my mouse? Yeah, okay. So you can see like which direction the muscle fibers go in, which helps know how they work, right? So we can see here like the traps. So from your neck to your shoulder, that the muscle fibers are going this way. That means that's how they're going to contract. These muscles right here are going to move your shoulder up and in towards your ear, right? At this like diagonal motion. That's literally the direction it's moving, because that's the direction that the muscle fibers are going. Same, we already pointed out the bicep, they're up and down because that's the direction that the bicep curl goes. Hamstrings, those are all up and down like vertical strings. That's how we're gonna, if we were standing and we're gonna about to kick our butt or do hamstring curls by picking up our heel. So anyway, this is why I think it's important to understand like muscle fibers. But this is just a quick little diagram, and I added my own little words too on the sides because it says like shoulders, which, you know, we could refer to that as delts or deltoids. Chest, which would be pecs, upper back, which I would refer to lats, but your lats, which we will get into, isn't just up here. This whole area is your lats. Your lats are a pretty big muscle on the whole backside, basically from your armpit all the way to your lower back, this big thing right here. So yeah. Okay, skeletal system. So this picture here is just proper spinal alignment. We're kind of naturally born with this curve, unless we have like scoliosis or something going on. But you know, so we have a slight curve here, right, in your neck. We don't have a completely straightened neck. This upper back sort of starts to protrude a little bit, and we have a little bit of a lower back sway. This is perfect. This is an ideal spine. So while we're working out, we either want to be keeping this or ideally getting it more straight, like kind of stacking all the vertebrae, right? So like instead of being here as we're working out, a lot of times they'll give the cue of like bringing your neck or bringing your chin back, kind of like tucking your chin. Think about like for a deadlift, I've probably told a lot of you guys, make sure you're not looking forward as you're going down in a deadlift. We want to bring that chin back to really keep all of the vertebrae stacked on top of each other. And again, this is going to be super important to make sure that you don't hurt your back. So yeah, while working out, imagine stacking all your vertebrae on top of one another, chin back, tailbone lengthened, right? So that the tailbone isn't flaring out like this too much. And then again, that makes the abs splayed out and lengthened. So think about like closing your rib cage. That's another thing I tell people in order to brace their core. So make sure your abs aren't splayed out, and make sure kind of closing the rib cage. And if you want to put your hands like on your rib cage, you'll feel when it opens, when you arch, and you'll feel it close as you brace and contract. And again, not like a rounding, but just more of a bracing from all directions. And when we talk about our spine, I really want all of the awareness to be from your neck, which it actually goes up into your skull, down to your tailbone. That's your back. That is your spine. So not just being aware of, you know, maybe this area here, but of the whole thing. And also the spine does move in all directions. So, you know, woohoo, like this and like this. The spine moves in every direction, up, down, left, right, twist, turn. So with that being said, global spine or global curves of the spine are ideal. Global curve, meaning like it's all moving at once rather than just like a little part of it, right? This would be like just one part of my entire spine moving versus the entire thing moving globally. Ideally, as we're working out and as we're using heavy weights and load, we want the spine to only move globally instead of one area. But this is a huge thing that a lot of coaches don't talk about. No movement is inherently wrong or dangerous. Our bodies are fucking awesome. We are meant to be monkeys climbing in jungles, swinging around from one arm to the next, being imbalanced, having a more dominant side, jumping, landing, fighting. Like our body there is no like dangerous way to move your body unless you're using an inappropriate load, like a really heavy load that you've never done before, unless you have lack of mobility, And, or if you're just not listening to your body's internal feedback, your body will always tell you, you'll get that alert in your brain, don't do that, this is bad, you're going to get hurt, stop. If you push past those points, then that's when, shit gets dangerous. But don't ever feel like there's any wrong or movements to do. And that's been a huge shift as I've, been a coach. The first couple of years of a coach, I would be in the gym and I'd be like, they're doing that wrong. They're doing that wrong. They don't know what they're. But then you realize we all have bodies that are supposed to be capable of doing anything and moving in any direction. There really is no right or wrong way. You just might be strengthening different things that maybe you aren't intending to strengthen, or maybe they are. So just wanted to throw that in there. So the 4 points of the torso, this is for you, Vicky. It's nothing too crazy, but your shoulders and your hips, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Ideally, we do want to keep those squared. So keeping your shoulders square, keeping your hips square. When we say that, we're imagining that, like, I guess this is kind of more of a rectangle depending on the length of your torso. So imagining those 4 points is just a good kind of cue to know where your body is in space. And this applies going this way as well. So if we're doing like a bent over, let's say a single arm dumbbell row, and we're, getting this here, we don't want those 4 points of the torso to be dipping too far and twisting all the way up. Again, it's not dangerous, you're not going to die, but just in order to actually target the muscles that we're trying to do. So just being aware of those 4 points of the torso could be beneficial. And then usually most of the time you want to stack joints. This doesn't apply for every single movement, but the majority of the time, just envision that you're stacking joints, especially for overhead movements. So if you're pressing anything overhead, your wrist, elbow, shoulder, hips, knees, ankles should be stacked on top of each other. This also applies for wrist to shoulders. So like a good example is, let's say you're in a plank, in a high plank, your shoulders, elbows, and wrists should all be stacked on top of each other so that you're not like this or not like that. Hips and ankles usually should be stacked on top of each other. Like, let's say if you're just standing and doing an overhead press, the distance between your feet, ideally your ankles should be stacked directly under your knees, which are stacked directly under your hips. Okay, so things like that. And then knees tracking over your big toes, right? So like as you're going into a squat, we don't want your knees to not be stacked over your toes, sort of thing. So, and then here's a cute little, isn't this so crazy that this is us? Like this could be a picture of you and you don't even know that. I think that is so crazy. We're just so cute. And this is my favorite little guy. I would get a life-size skeleton for my house. But knowing these is, Angie thought that was funny. I know, I won't win. I think they're so cute. And I'm also like, how do we look different when we get like skin and muscle on our face, but like our skulls actually look the same? So anyhow, but this is just like a little breakdown. Again, this could be a good screenshot or picture. I do want to point out the femur. So from your hip to your knee, first of all, this is the most dense bone in your body. So it's kind of like the hardest bone to break. So when people say they broke their femur, I'm like, what? That's crazy. The length of this bone here dictates your squat form. So if you're, and you don't need to like take a measuring tape or something and measure it, but it's kind of easy to tell sometimes. If the length of your femur is really long, you'll notice that maybe you either feel like you're falling backwards sometimes as you squat, or that you lean forward as you squat. Okay, and that's okay. We need to adjust your form based off of your anatomy. Yeah, I feel like that's really all we need to get into here. But yeah. And then the pelvis, actually, the pelvis is something to point out. The pelvis is like a bowl. So we want to make sure that we're never tipping the bowl forward or tipping the bowl backwards. We really want a neutral pelvis, right? So just a bowl that's holding the water and not spilling out. Okay, hip hinge, my favorite. So the deadlift, this is the hip hinge, right? So this is that hip, the pelvis that we're talking about. And here, let me just get into the 3 movements that I'm talking about with a hip hinge here. Deadlift, kettlebell swing, bent over row, just the positioning, and then a hip thrust. So these are all hip hinge movements. Of course, our hips hinge in other things as well. Your hips are hinging in a squat, right? Your hips have to be bending. But here in a deadlift is where the hip hinge is the main thing working. We have a slight bend in our knees because they don't need to be locked out. But this is the biggest difference between a deadlift or a squat or a kettlebell swing or a squat or something, is what joint is really getting the majority of the movement here. So here are just a couple form things that I've said a million times throughout my coaching career. Maybe you've heard some of these things, maybe you haven't. Ideally, I think it could be helpful for everybody to just be aware of kind of the common things to look for when it comes to a deadlift. So shoulders should be pressed down and back. And then as you go into a deadlift, the first thing that happens is your hips pull backwards. And the only reason you start to tilt forward is because your hips are pulling you backwards. So it's only a distribution of weight. It's not you are diving down. You're not going down or forward. You're only going forward as much as your hips pull back. As soon as your hips are done pulling back, you stand right back up. And the way that we can improve that is through mobility, through hamstring flexibility and whatnot, if we're noticing that you're not able to get very low. A couple other things, the weights should not go lower than like your upper shins. So like as soon as the dumbbell or the weights are just right below your knees, that's basically as low as you need to go before it starts to dump into your lower back. Keep your weight pulled back into your heels. Keep your rib cage closed to brace your core. Tuck your chin, lengthen your tailbone. Your eyes should be following the movement. And then keep the dumbbell or the barbell or whatever you're using literally touching your legs, scraping your shins. Ideally, don't even do deadlifts in shorts, wear leggings, because that's how close it should be to your skin. And then also don't hyperextend when you stand up. So you do not need to do any extra thrust at the top of a deadlift or at the top of a squat or anything like that. Kettlebell swing, literally the exact same motion as a deadlift, except your legs might be slightly wider apart in order for the kettlebell to be able to swing through. This is something that you really want to go heavy on. This is a movement that it's pointless to do a kettlebell swing if you're not going heavy because there's just so much momentum in it. So keep the kettlebell above your knee height. So if I'm watching you from the side like this, the kettlebell should be above your knee. So it should be right here, just swinging right under your crotch. And then you use your force or the force of your hips to swing the weight forward. Okay, so that's the only thing that's moving the weight. Your arms are just there for the ride. We're not lifting with our arms or anything at all. And then barbell bent over row, we're in the same position. So we're not talking too much about like the upper body movements right now. But again, ankles under hips, wrists should be under your elbows when you're fully bent. So as you're in the full row, your wrist should be stacked directly under your elbow. You don't want to be rowing like this or like this. Okay, we want stacked right under each other. Gaze ahead of you on the floor and then keeping your core tight, as well as wrist alignment for basically anything. We never really want wrists like this or wrists like this. We always want really strong wrists. Tighter the grip, the stronger your wrist. And then hip thrusts, same thing as a hip hinge. Keep your chin tucked, spine stays in alignment to prevent lower back pain. Drive through your heels, engage your core, move with your breath. So inhale on the eccentric, exhale on the concentric. And go heavy with this one because the glutes are the strongest muscle in the body. Or is it like the tongue? People say the tongue. I don't know. I've never tested that out. Knee hinge. Okay, so this is when squats come into play. So sit back into your heels. Keep your knees pointing in the same directions as your middle toe. Neutral spine from neck to tailbone. Close your ribcage to brace your core, which will also protect your back. And at least bend your knees to 90 degrees. Ideally, your hips will be lower than your knees at the bottom of the movement. However, we do not want to go so low to where we get a butt wink, which is when your tailbone and your pelvis start to tuck under. So imagine watching somebody squat from the side, and as they're at the bottom of the squat, their tailbone starts to go under. That we call that a butt wink. We don't want to do that. The distance of your feet depends on your personal anatomy. Again, if you have longer femurs, I'd say open your legs a little wider, or just play around, see what feels comfortable. Take videos of yourself. This is why everybody should take videos of themselves so we can actually see how you look. No one would ever know if they had a butt wink unless they recorded themselves. So that's why all the pros record themselves in the gym. The bar placement on your back depends on your anatomy and your preference. And then also sumo versus traditional foot stances kind of change, the anatomy of the squats as well as deadlifts. Step ups are also a knee hinge movement. Drive through your heel of the working foot, the one that's on the box. No momentum from that back foot. Think about pressing down into the foot that's on the box rather than stepping up. And if you want more glute engagement, you're going to have a forward lean and stand all the way up at the top. Lunges, everyone's favorite. Of course, I got Bulgarian split squats too. So lunges are kind of this. Oh wait, never mind. Lunges. closer foot stance, so the closer your feet are to each other, like the distance, the more quad focus. So if your knee is kind of going past your toe in lunges, we're really focusing on the quads then. If your feet are further apart from each other, we have a longer stride, then that's going to be more glute focused. If we keep your torso upright, that's going to be more quad focused. And if we lean your torso forward, it's going to be more glute focused. Same thing with Bulgarian split squats, but think about sending your hips backwards. So as you go down, think about sending your hips back towards that back foot, towards the bench, ideally keeping your front knee stacked right on top of that front ankle. And this is kind of a big thing. So if you are somebody who's working out at home or only with dumbbells or only group fitness classes, your upper body is always going to be weaker than your lower body. Okay, so it has smaller muscles, it has smaller joints, it has weaker bones. Your legs are always going to be stronger than your upper body, no matter who you are. Well, I don't know everybody, but if you're only doing at-home workouts, group fitness, dumbbell only, past the point of your first few months as a beginner. As a beginner, I think it's amazing if you're not comfortable in the gym yet, or if these weights are appropriate for where you're at right now, then there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. However, as you progress, your legs are going to be very limited because of your upper body strength. Example would be a goblet squat. If a goblet squat, holding a dumbbell at your chest or even holding the dumbbell down below you, is your only form of doing a squat because you only have access to dumbbells, then you are only able to, your legs are only able to lift as much as your arms or grip can hold, which is going to be a fraction of what your legs can actually do. This is why there's a huge benefit of machines and barbells. Barbells, are the long things where you put weights on the side, so we can hold a bunch of weight with it just resting on this bar. And then machines are awesome because we can really isolate the muscle that we want to work without always needing to stabilize and use every muscle in the body. All right, this is a long one, but we're almost done, I promise. Shoulders, lats, neck, and traps. So we're kind of just moving into upper body. Something I do want to point out too is full range of motion. Ideally, the joint should fully straighten and fully bend in a movement. Example, elbows fully straighten at the bottom of a tricep push down or at the bottom of a bicep curl. And ideally, they get the full stretch at that as well, right? So we want the muscle to stretch as well as contract. Both are equally as important through each rep. And I wanted to point out lateral raises. These are a movement that I also see a lot of issues with sometimes. So there's 3 sides to the delt. We have the front delt, side delt, rear delt. Okay, so just you can kind of envision that. When we're doing lateral raises like this out to the side, we're working that side delt, the lateral delt. The way we're going to do that is think about your arms kind of slightly in front of you so that they're not completely out to the side. Like they should just be in your peripheral so you still kind of see your hands. Definitely keep a slight bend in your elbow the whole time. So your elbow's not bending and straightening, but it's not locked out. So it's just keeping that soft bend. Your pinky side of your hand is slightly higher. So we're at this little bit of a bend here, or a tilt, I should say. We keep the shoulders down out of your ears so that we don't, really use those traps. Again, kind of like that muscle that we pointed out up here. We don't want to be using that. And then really important too, to keep your jaw loose, keep your tongue soft, keep your face soft during these. To relieve neck tension. Okay, we can get like a lot of tension here if we're like this or biting down or our tongue is really stiff. Think it's all muscles, they're all connected. So that's just something I definitely think is important. And then here's some diagrams too. These are the lats. So this is really all I got for lats is pictures, because I feel like that explains it the best. So as we're doing bent over rows here, this is your lat. It's a really, really big muscle. We see it stretching here. So as it's hanging down, we should feel a big stretch right here. And then as we pull and contract, we're going to feel those muscles contract. Okay, same thing here for a single arm dumbbell row. I feel these a little bit more towards like the side of my lat, which is why I liked this picture, because you can literally see that it's like the muscle literally under his armpit, kind of going towards his hip on the side. We want to be able to start feeling that stretch and contract. The way that I like to feel that is I put my hands like this and I squeeze my armpits like down and back as if I was squeezing a lemon in my armpits. Or you can do it in any position, but just imagine really squeezing your armpits behind you, like squeezing a lemon, kind of even like when you would like fart in your hand, that sort of vibe. That's what your lats do. Your lat is the muscle that brings your elbow down and back. And then same thing for lat pull downs. Lat pull downs are a little bit more like upper back movement. They're not the best for lats down here. But nonetheless, they're still great, and you still want to feel that stretch on the way up, and you want to feel that contraction on the way down. I also do want to point out how his wrist is in line with his elbow, which is in line with his shoulder. You know, we're not kind of getting this like forward crunching as we pull. And then, yeah, just again, pointing these out. So this is what's used in a lat pull down, your lats. This is rear delts. So rear delts are a very tiny muscle, and you're gonna feel back movements in your biceps until your biceps are strong enough for your back to start taking over, right? Because this little muscle here, your biceps are going to be weaker than your lats, especially when you first start working out. So it's totally normal if you are starting to feel all of your back movements in your biceps at first, maybe for the first like year or two. All right, that's it. That was a long one, but I think that was a good one, hopefully. And I know threw a lot of things at you. So any questions, any additions, anything?
Great job.
Okay. All right. This was a long one. Love you guys. Thanks for showing up. Hopefully you took a picture and can post it. Whoever at random will win a free supplement. So yeah, we'll see you guys tomorrow night for yoga. Woohoo!
Thank you. It was an awesome talk.